We're going to go through quarterback, tight end, defense rankings. I know there are a couple tight ends on bye, and friggin' I have Laporta, so I'm screwed. But going through and looking at what we have at quarterback, tier one, this is the Mount Rushmore. These are the guys that have all the rushing upside, plus the passing volume. Every single week you start them. If you have them, you only need a backup during their bye week as a fill-in. Lamar, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen. There's absolutely nothing to talk about. Rank them in whatever order you want. Now, going down to tier two, this is where things maybe get a little spicy. Joe Burrow would be a tier one quarterback if it wasn't for the fact that obviously you just don't have the same rushing upside that you get with the tier one options. But Burrow has been legitimately insane this season. Now, obviously, the Bengals have lost a lot of games, so maybe the play of Burrow has kind of been overlooked a bit. But if you're looking at Burrow this year, you have 2, 3, 2, 5, 2, 1, 5, 4 passing touchdowns, sprinkle in a rushing touchdown to only 4 total interceptions. The man's been great. There's an outside chance you get T. Higgins back into this offense this week as well, which will make him even better. The only thing is, this is a pretty tough matchup that you have going up against the Chargers. You actually do have the Chargers favored by 1.5, which I found interesting in this game. Now, our next option here will be Brock Purdy. If you are looking at Purdy, this is my quarterback in the Flock League, coming off a monstrous performance here against the Buccaneers, where we get the 353 passing yards, multiple passing touchdowns, and Purdy actually does have a little bit of rushing upside. I'm not going to sit here and act like he's some elite rusher, but we have seen 3 rushing touchdowns this season. The rushing yards have been there as well. And if you're looking at the consistency that we've had with Brock Purdy, every single game over the past month, you've had at least 20 fantasy points. You have Debo, Kittle, both fully healthy. You have Ricky Pearsall and Juwan Jennings coming on as well. It's a great matchup against the Seahawks, where you currently do have an implied team total of 28.5 points here, and the Niners only project behind the Lions with total points scored in this slate. Now, going over to what we have with our next option, we are going to be looking at Jordan Love. Most weeks we'll probably have Love ahead of Brock Purdy. Like, Love is ahead of Purdy in my rest of season ranks. It's just not a great spot. You have an over-under like 40.5 points against the Chicago Bears here, while at the same time you actually have a 7-point spread. So more likely than not, I think you should expect that we actually do have the Green Bay Packers looking to run the ball in this game more than throw it. You can actually see it with the underdog pick'em that you have with Jordan Love as well, where typically Love's a quarterback that you can pencil in to have 30 plus pass attempts. But here he's actually higher, lower 234.5 passing yards right now. So if you think that the passing volume will be there, sure, go ahead and take the higher than 234.5. Just for me, I don't love the matchup, and I don't think it's going to be a high scoring game in general. And of course, if you want to check out that pick'em or any other pick'em, you can find them over on Underdog Fantasy. The link's in the description, comment section. And if you use code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll get a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night. And a free pick. If it's for tonight's game, it would be the free Jalen Hurts pick, more than less than half a total yard. Now, our next tier is going to be led off with a Mr. Patrick Mahomes. Now, if you're looking at Mahomes, he's been better over the past 3 weeks, where the man is averaging about 20 points per game. What's very interesting with Mahomes is we have seen him in the past in games that matter and games that are close. He will go out there and he will run the ball some. Now, obviously, we're not expecting it to be a ton. But like in the game against the Niners, right, you get the 39 rushing yards and the rushing touchdown. The game against the Bengals early in the season, that was very close. You get the 29 rushing yards here as well. So you will have some rushing volume. And this is a game where currently the Buffalo Bills are actually favored. So the expectation should be that the Chiefs are probably forced to actually throw the ball here, and they can't run it as they usually want to. Now, Bo Nix will be our next option. If you're looking at Bo Nix, you actually have the Denver Broncos favored over Atlanta here, which is very interesting. You have an implied team total of 23.5 points. This actually means that the Broncos project outscore more points than the Chiefs this week. And while Bo Nix isn't necessarily that Mount Rushmore level quarterback in terms of the rushing upside, he's similar to like Brock Purdy with the rushing that we have seen. I mean, you have multiple games with over 50 rushing yards. You have 4 rushing touchdowns on the season. And over the past 3 weeks, he has been averaging about 20 points per game, very similar to Mahomes. Pretty good matchup as well. Jared Goff projects to be the highest scoring offense in the league this week. Obviously, that's very nice, but Goff will not run the ball at all here. Not only will Goff not run it at all, but at the same time, we can assume that the majority of the points scored in Detroit are probably with the running backs, which is something I'd be concerned with. Tua will be our next quarterback. This is the highest that we have ranked Tua all season, but this is also the highest that I have seen the Miami Dolphins offense project out all year now. You have an implied team total closing in on 27 points. The issue that you're going to have with Tua will be very similar to the issue that you have with Jared Goff, and that, yeah, the offense projects to be great. You have a spread on this game of 8 points, but a lot of that may get funneled through the running back position. Drake May will be our next play. If you're looking at May, you have some rushing upside. Over the past 3 weeks, the man is averaging about 50, 60 rushing yards per game. He only has 2 games with 20 or more fantasy points so far this season. This matchup against the Rams is kind of whatever. Typically, you're used to seeing the Patriots sit here with an implied team total only around like 16, 17 points. But this week, they're at 19.5. And then CJ Stroud, honestly, should probably move up these rankings as you get Nico Collins back in. I'd expect this to be a much better offense. With Stroud, the issue is, obviously, you don't really have the rushing upside. And if you look at Stroud, you've only had 1 game this season with 20 or more fantasy points. And that was back in week 4 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I have more faith in Stroud, of course, as Nico comes back in. But this is also a game going up against Dallas. We're going to assume that they do go ahead and they run the ball. The only other quarterbacks I'd consider starting this week, you have Geno Smith going up against the Niners. The Seahawks have been shown that they're willing to abandon the run when they fall behind. They're probably going to fall behind in this game. You have Matthew Stafford in a spot going up against New England where, I don't know, I mean, you just don't have rushing upside, and it's an offense that can probably run. Kirk Cousins, really tough matchup going up against Denver. Sam Darnold's in a game where you have a 7-point spread. Presumably, the Titans aren't going to be able to put points on the board. Justin Herbert, I know a lot of people are upset that typically we don't have Herbert inside the top 20 of these rankings. I'm very sorry. Freaking sue me. What do you want? Don't get mad at me that the Los Angeles Chargers go through and run the ball over and over and over again. Justin Herbert's QB 19 on the season, playing every single game. And Justin Herbert at the same time has fewer games with 15 or more points than he does with fewer than 15 points. But this week, it is a good matchup for Justin Herbert going up against Cincy. So if you're ever going to start Justin Herbert, it would be this week. Russell Wilson against Baltimore in a really good matchup. If you look at Russ over the past 3 weeks, he's averaging about 17 points per game. And then looking at Aaron Rodgers as our last option here. Obviously, it feels horrendous telling anybody to start him when you're coming off a game with 4 fantasy points, but sportsbooks are saying it's going to be a much better offense this next week. Going over to tight ends, keep it very brief with the top tier. Kittle, Kelsey, Bowers are all guys that you need to start. And honestly, I would say that they could probably be flex consideration pieces as well if you play in a league where you don't have to start a tight end and your tight end slot is an extra flex. Now going down to tier 2, this will be the highest that we have ranked TJ Hawkinson all season. But tight end's kind of gross, and Hawkinson comes out. He shows some life. You get the 9 targets, the 8 receptions, 72 receiving yards. He leads this Minnesota Vikings team in receiving this past week. You get the 15 fantasy points. And the main thing is everybody else, the tight ends gross. Like Kyle Pitts has been up and down all season. Kyle Pitts has 2 games this year with 8 or more targets. And it's a tough matchup going up against Denver. David Njoku, honestly, as I look at this, should be higher. I'm going to obviously rank these guys or update the rankings of these guys every single day on flockfantasy.com. And I'm actually probably going to move David Njoku up to 4, where over the past month, I mean, David Njoku has gone through and he's averaged over 8 targets a game. Obviously, the passing volume looks a lot better with Watson under center. And you do actually have David Njoku higher, lower, 52.5 receiving yards on Underdog, which is much higher than the other options in this tier. So David Njoku actually should probably be tight end 4. Mark Andrews will be the next option. It's very difficult to rank Andrews at the moment, not knowing if Likely is going to play. If Likely does play, I think Andrews falls to the tier below. Andrews is sitting here with a very unsustainable touchdown rate, where you have seen 5 touchdowns scored over the past 5 games. However, you actually only had 4, 5, 2, and 7 targets in these contests. So like Andrews has like a touchdown rate over the past 5 weeks of like 20%. This will come down, but no Likely. He's interesting. And then our next tier, you're going to have somebody like Tucker Kraft, where Kraft, another tight end with an unsustainable touchdown rate, tougher matchup. Evan Ingram in one of the league's worst offenses, but at least you're guaranteed to get the target volume. Dallas Goedert, I know, may seem like he's a little bit lower in these rankings based off the fact you're coming off the game with the receiving touchdown and 10 fantasy points. Just be realistic with Goedert. He should be very low in the target totem pole in this offense. And you have an implied team total here, which is nice with 26 points, but a lot of this should come with the Eagles' rushing attack. And right now, actually, on Underdog, you only have Dallas Goedert higher, lower 30.5 receiving yards. So if you're in love with Goedert, don't scream at me in the comment section. Go take the higher than 30.5 receiving yards. Hunter Henry will be the next name. Henry gives you the absolute dud against Chicago this past week, but it was a tough matchup. And if you take a step backwards, Henry obviously has been a decent option with Drake May under center. Taysom Hill, 2 weeks ago, freaking crushed me in the Flock League, pissed me off. But here, it's actually a very interesting matchup against Cleveland, where typically we're used to seeing the Saints with an implied team total fewer than 20 points. But this week, they actually project out to be an average to an above average offense here against the Browns for whatever reason. And obviously, the only options you have in this offense are freaking Kamara and Taysom. There's literally nobody else to look at. Mike Gesicki will be the next player that we have here. With Gesicki, I think that you could move him up dramatically if T. Higgins is ruled out. I know everybody played Gesicki against Baltimore this past week and they were let down, but the underlying usage was there where he had the 9 targets. So if you have no Higgins, move Gesicki probably up to tight end 8. But obviously, I am kind of assuming that Higgins is back this week. I'm dropping down to our next tier. Jonnu Smith looks like he may be viable at this point over the past month. I mean, you have seen over the past 5 weeks, you've actually had 4 of these games or 5 of these games with 45 or more receiving yards. Jake Ferguson, garbage offense, only 5 targets last week as well. Pat Freiermuth, the target volume hasn't consistently been there. Obviously, we dropped him back in the game where he screwed us with the Dallas lateral fumble. Since then, you've had 3, 7, 3, and 10 fantasy points. But also, since week 4, you have 3, 3, 3, 2, and 3 targets. Target volume's not there. I mean, the guy I had to pick up off the waiver wire because I may not have Laporta's Pat Freiermuth. Obviously, if Laporta plays, I'm playing Laporta over Freiermuth. Dalton Schultz has not scored 10 fantasy points all season. And now you have Nico Collins coming in, so I'm not interested. And Cole Kmet is the 4th option in one of the league's worst offenses. So I'm not interested there either. Obviously, Laporta, Kincaid play. You play him over these guys. Now going over to defenses, I will reiterate what we say with defenses every single week. I do not know what I'm doing. I'm an idiot. This is maybe a suggestion, but definitely do not listen to me. Tier 1, Lions, Vikings, Texans, Packers. These are the defenses that I feel very comfortable with. The Lions, you get to play Mac Jones. The Vikings, you get to play the Titans. The Texans, you get to play against Cooper Rush. And the Packers, you get to play against a collapsing Bears offense. Our next tier will be the Dolphins, Jets, Rams, where you get to go up against the Raiders, Anthony Richardson, and a rookie quarterback with Drake May behind a garbage offensive line. Then the next tier will be the Niners, where you are 7-point favorites here over the Seattle Seahawks. The Saints, where you get to go up against Jameis. The Broncos, where you are just a phenomenal defense, where you're consistently seeing sacks, consistently seeing turnovers. The only hesitation that you potentially have here is it's a little bit of a tougher matchup having to play Atlanta. And then our next tier, we're going to be looking at the Browns-Ravens, where the Browns, you go up against the Saints with Derek Carr, no weapons. The Ravens haven't been a super great fantasy defense this season. And obviously the Steelers look much better at this point. And then our last tier, the Falcons are actually dogs in this game. The Eagles have been a great defense as of late. They generated a ton of pressures and have a ton of sacks this season. The issue is tough matchup going up against Jaden Daniels. The Tennessee Titans, obviously bad team. I don't even know why we ranked him. Darnold had a bunch of turnovers last week, but honestly, Titans should not start them. I'd rather go with the Bears. Bears, much tougher matchup going up against the Packers. Bills, much tougher matchup going up against the Chiefs. But obviously, much better defenses than the Titans. So for the love of God, do not start the Titans. But I think that's all I got for you. I really hope I was able to help you out with this. Of course, if you wanted to go and say, Mason, you're an idiot, Dallas Goedert is going to have more than 30.5 receiving yards, you can find that pick over there on Underdog Fantasy. And if you use code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to be getting a free Jalen Hurts pick, more than less than half a total yard for tonight's game, and a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night. Just make sure they use promo code FLOCK and set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog Fantasy. That way we're able to credit you with that free team review voucher. But thank you again. I really appreciate you and really hope that we get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.